Hello and welcome back to the Blue Castle podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and today it's just me. Molly is in the process of moving from one state to another across several states, so it's no small feat for her to do that, and I have been a little bit sick, so this is going to be a very short episode. And this time it's for real gonna actually be short because we say that a lot and then it's still an hour. But I'm guessing this will be about half the time, if that. So today I'm going to go over what I did last summer, and specifically I'm talking about when I moved to Orlando for 3 weeks. So saying I moved there is kind of dramatic, but I lived in Orlando for 3 full weeks. 2 and a third of those weeks I actually worked there, worked from my hotel or various hotels, resorts across Disney World. And then the last week was a little bit more of an actual vacation because my mom and my sister joined me and we did some fun stuff. So I'm going to be talking about that experience. And I have narrowed it down to the 7 things I loved about living by Disney. So hopefully if anyone else out there like me is just slightly curious what it would be like to actually live in Orlando, actually technically in the different areas around Disney World. So Kissimmee, Winter Garden, Horizon West, Windermere, those places. That's kind of what I was intrigued about and looking into. So yeah, that's what the episode's going to be today. Hope that sounds interesting. All right. So like I said, my goal was mostly to figure out if I wanted to live in the Orlando area. Obviously, I love Disney World and I've been interested in moving away from where I live right now because I can work from wherever I live. So I can't work from anywhere now, but at the time I could work from anywhere in the US. And if I live somewhere permanently, that's where I should be working from. Anyway, all of that doesn't really matter. The point is I was able to work from anywhere at the time. And so I was using that freedom to see if I was interested in a few places I'd been curious about, Orlando area being one of them. And then obviously the second goal is just to enjoy my time there. And so I, am never going to get the chance again, in theory, to live so close to Disney World and to feel what it's like to get to, just hop over to a resort for the evening. And, you see all these influencers, or at least I do, on social media and YouTube that live in the area. So they just function very differently at Disney World than I do, because they can just go pop over and get dinner at the Poly, or they just, pop over to Disney Springs and get to do random stuff there that I would just never get to do casually. It's always a very packed trip whenever I go because I want to get everything I want to do in versus kind of that casual experience. So that was the other piece of my goal, is just to really enjoy it and take advantage of my evenings, maybe a quick lunch break, that kind of thing. So some of the restrictions I had, firstly, was I obviously had to work. So I have a corporate job where I work from home, and then I had to stay somewhere affordable. That was another restriction. Obviously, staying there a longer period of time makes the whole thing more expensive. So I knew pretty quickly that on-site at Disney wasn't going to be an option because it needed to be affordable, because restriction number 3, and most notably, is I needed to bring my dog with me. I guess I could have had someone watch her, taken her to family, but for 3 full weeks, I just wanted her to come with me. And she's a pug, so she's small enough that it wasn't going to be super difficult or a big deal. But those were kind of my main things to think about, especially as I was starting to look at where I wanted to stay for the duration of my time, my 3 weeks in Orlando. So I ended up choosing to stay at the Town Place Suites at Flamingo Crossings, which, if you haven't heard, or maybe it's singular, Flamingo Crossing. Anyway, it's on the west side of the Disney bubble, Disney property. And when you enter, you're really close to Animal Kingdom and Coronado Springs. But that's also the side of Disney that has a ton of just open land. So you're actually driving for quite a while before you even see, like, you're in Disney property, but it's just nothing. It's like lots of trees. I think there's an area that has like solar panels, like a solar farm where they're just harvesting energy from the sun and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of just empty space that I'm not sure if they're ever going to do something with, but I thought that was interesting. Anyway, going back to where I stayed. So yeah, the Town Place Suites at Flamingo Crossings, that was where I ended up choosing to stay. And spoiler alert, I really loved it. It was a great time. There are some pros and cons of that place that I'll get to in a second, but I'm actually going to back up here for a second and talk about how I got there. So I live in the Dallas area, and I drove from Dallas to Florida. I actually had my dad rode with me, which I did not ask him to. He volunteered. And then we stayed at a nice little pet-friendly hotel along the way in Mobile, Alabama. I think it was just a La Quinta. It wasn't that nice, but it was good enough. Once we got there, my dad and I got me settled into my hotel room, and we actually headed to Disney Springs and got dinner at the Boathouse, which was really good. It was the first time I've ever had a lobster roll. That was delicious. I think my dad got an old fashioned, and I think he really liked that. And overall, it was just really a great, like, I love that restaurant, and great view, great vibe, delicious food. And then I think he stayed one night, and then he headed back using my airline benefits. He just flew back to Oklahoma the next day. And at that point, it was just me, and it was time for me to settle in. And I set up my work from home setup. I have an extra monitor that is pretty portable, and kind of got that all situated. So I'll give a quick recap of the Town Place Suites. And I have a few other kind of things I wanted to touch on before I get to my list of 7 things I loved about Disney. But the Town Place Suites, it was about $160 per night for 2 weeks. And this was in June of 2023. So it's a very busy time of year, and that's just before it gets pretty hot. So it's just a popular time to go. I really loved the Town Place Suites. I think the cons were that it was outside of the Disney bubble, and you had to pay if you wanted to use their shuttle. So you had to use an Uber or something like that. And then another con was just that you had to pay for your pet, which I think most places you do, but it was a one-time fee of $150. And for staying there for 2 full weeks, that really isn't that bad, comparatively speaking. Sometimes it's a daily fee, which can really add up for a longer trip. And the pros were that it's a great location. Obviously, you still had to drive to get there, but it was very close, relatively speaking. And then I love the Flamingo Crossing area. It's a new area, so it's not, I don't know, it doesn't have a lot of the like tacky touristy stuff around it. It really just had some nicer, newer, and like kind of moderate, affordable types of hotels. And then in the center of that area, so around like kind of this circle around that, the Flamingo Crossing area is all hotels. And then in the middle is a bunch of restaurants and a Target. And I think some other types of stores and stuff. It was even newer when I went, and there was a lot of like new construction kind of happening, or like, I don't know, it was mostly done with construction, but it was like coming soon signs for like new restaurants and things coming in. So there wasn't a ton there yet when I was there, but there was definitely enough to get me by. So that was great, especially because I could just walk right over to Target or take a little super, super short car ride if I didn't want to have to carry groceries or something. So yeah, like I talked about, I worked from home most days, and then over lunch, I really made my focus typically during lunch to try to go, if I was able to. Sometimes work days, you just end up not having enough time to do these things, but I wanted to go visit one of the different neighborhoods or little communities that I was interested in moving to if I decided to move to that area. So the ones I was interested in were Windermere, Winter Garden, Horizon West, and I kind of knew Celebration was not something I was interested in, but I still wanted to visit it because if you don't know, Celebration is a community that was started because of Disney World by the Disney company. So it was just kind of a bucket list thing to go check that out. And so over lunch, and then when I was kind of done exploring those places, and then in the evenings, it's typically when I did Disney World things. So I resort hopped. I often either drove straight to the resort if I had kind of a super secret way to get in, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or I drove to Disney Springs and typically looked around Disney Springs a little bit, but I used Disney Springs as a free parking space and then just hopped on a bus to get to whatever resort I wanted to go to. And then the other thing I did, which I hadn't totally thought about at the beginning, but then I was like, you know what, I'm here, I might as well, was I resort hopped at Universal. And I went to Universal City Walk, and that was super fun too. So those were kind of the main things I did, what the big picture purpose of the trip was. So next, I'm going to go through probably pretty quickly my 7 things I loved about living by Disney. And it's 7 things literally because I went to make this list and I originally called it 10 things and then I only came up with 7. I'm sure there are other things, but they weren't probably unique enough in my mind to worth jotting down. But number 1, this is my go-to favorite thing when I lived at Flamingo Crossing area was driving to Disney Springs and then taking the bus to the Riviera. Like that became, honestly, I probably did it like 3 times, but in my mind, it was like my go-to, my tradition when I was living there because I love the Riviera and Disney Springs. The bus route from Disney Springs to the Riviera is so short that like if you want something quick and easy, but you don't want to be limited by the few resorts you can park at. Like that was just the perfect combination. And then also the Riviera, I've said this once before, in my mind, it's like the gateway to the rest of the property, which is kind of crazy and it's not totally true, but you can get to Hollywood Studios, multiple resorts, like beyond just the Epcot resorts, and then also Epcot and the Epcot resorts. So you can get basically to half of Disney World from the Riviera on the Skyliner. And that's just incredible. It's a whole different experience than the bus, especially if you're traveling solo and it's not a crazy busy time. You can usually get your own gondola on the Skyliner, which is awesome. Okay. Number 2 favorite thing that I loved doing when I lived at Disney was driving to resorts directly, quote, to try XYZ unique dessert. So what I mean by that is you can drive and park at certain resorts, but you're generally going to get like the side eye or kind of like a questioning person at kind of the security gate at the front. But they usually will let you park if you have a good reason. And if you say something like, I'm only going to be here for like less than an hour, because for me, that was generally true. Or if I was like maybe an hour and a half, like I would give them my best guess at how long I was going to stay, but they just want to know you're not going to stay and park and like use up that parking spot for a long time. And so the few places that I went to and did this were Disney's Animal Kingdom Lodge. And there, the dessert I legitimately wanted to try and did try was the zebra domes. And you can use that excuse whether or not you're going to try the zebra domes, depending on your appetite for ethical gray areas. But I did that and had no problems. At Pop Century, I parked there and I tried the tie-dyed cheesecake. The security lady there was like very familiar with that and was like, oh yeah, of course, you got to try it. So it just obviously depends on who you get. So those 2 are probably really easy in general because they're both not convenient places for people to want to park unless they're truly doing like just a short little resort checkout situation. But the next one is a little bit more of a gray area because it is a Magic Kingdom resort, but it's Wilderness Lodge. And I actually didn't try this, but I think you could probably get away with it. And I would like to try it in the future if I have a car in Disney. But I think you could go to Wilderness Lodge and get away with parking there if you say, I really want to try, some of the unique to Wilderness Lodge desserts. Like they have a s'mores cupcake, or they have, the Gold Rush latte, or things like that are unique to that resort. I think you could get away with that one. So I'd be curious to know if anyone has ever tried that. Obviously they have. I'm curious to know how it went. Okay. And then the last one that I had the most skeptical security person, but she let me through, was at Coronado Springs. I asked if I could park there to get a coffee drink because I told her, I was like, I've heard the coffee here is really good and I just want to, try the coffee and I'll be in and out pretty quick. And I think it must have been a really busy day. Maybe she felt like they were limited on parking, but I was like, I promise I'll be gone in maximum 2 hours, but like definitely under 2 hours. And so she let me in. Anyway, I really enjoyed visiting all of those resorts. Coronado Springs, as I've said before, I absolutely loved and was, I guess, I'm not really surprised by because I had heard those reviews before, but I actually worked from there for a little bit. I did bring my laptop, but it wasn't very long. Obviously, the lady was worried about parking and I didn't want to overstay my welcome, but I did get a coffee drink and work from there for a little bit. But that was so close to my hotel at the Town Place Suites at Flamingo Crossing. Like that's the closest, that's the first like Disney thing you see when you're entering Disney property. So that was a super quick little drive. No big deal to make that drive during the workday. All right, number 3 was, this one's kind of boring, but it was true. The third thing I loved about living by Disney was just going to Disney Springs in general. I think it's kind of like a combination of the fun of going to a really nice outdoor mall with really great shopping, but also there's so much theming with all of it that's fun. And then the big X factor, magic, if you will, the pixie dust, is that you have so many people there that are there on vacation. So the energy is just different. Anyway, I just really love Disney Springs. I love the energy there. I just don't like it in the middle of the day when it's hot, but I generally went in the evening, so it was great. Okay, the fourth thing that I loved about living by Disney was Universal City Walk, which is obviously not Disney, but I was close enough to take a relatively short little drive. I think it was about like 30 minutes or something, over to the free parking at Universal City Walk, and I really enjoyed just popping over there. I didn't do that very much compared to Disney, but I love Universal and the vibes are always just really fun there. And it's a very much like comes alive at night. So that was fun to kind of go there in the evening once or twice. And then the fifth thing on my list that I loved about living by Disney goes with the last one. I loved Universal resort hopping, using the boats in particular. And the walk is nice too, but the boats were really great. And I had consumed significantly less content about the Universal resorts. Like I didn't even know all the names of them, what the themes meant or were about or anything like that. Maybe 1 or 2 of them. So it was super fun to check out those resorts. And I'm obsessed with Sapphire Falls, even though it's not a deluxe. I'm really sad it's actually not, because then you don't get the benefit of the Max Pass. But anyway, I do want to stay at many of those resorts in the future. But that was really, really cool. All right, the 6th thing that I loved living by Disney was working from the Disney resorts. So I mentioned that with Coronado Springs, but I think I did it maybe 3 times total, where I worked from different resorts for very short amounts of time, mostly because, I don't know, I just like liked my setup, and I had my dog back at the hotel, and I just didn't want to leave her for longer periods of time, but it was great, a great experience overall. I think if I had a different type of job where there was less chance of spontaneous work calls where, people are on camera and stuff like that, I would be more inclined to stay there longer periods of time. So if you have more of a heads down work kind of a job, that would be really, really cool to do that even more. Okay, and the last thing that surprised me about what I loved so much about living by Disney was less about Disney and more about Florida and Orlando, was the weather. I actually really enjoyed the weather. I loved the clouds. Like in Texas, and I grew up in Oklahoma, clouds are great because we do get storms and you can see forever because it's pretty flat. But something about the clouds in Florida, they were like extra, extra fluffy. The sunsets were extra colorful. It was just really beautiful when I was there. And then the weather itself, I think it was just I got lucky in 2023, that summer of June. Something like the weather was just beautiful. Like it wasn't crazy hot yet. And the mornings were pretty they were muggy for sure, like classic Florida, but I got used to that and I thought I would be just like miserable from heat, but it was really pretty nice. And then a lot of the time there would be a storm in the afternoon and it would cool it down. So it would be pretty tolerable like in the evening and like pretty nice. So that was the 7th thing. And I really couldn't think of much else. I'm sure there were other things I liked, but that's really it. Oh, one other thing I wanted to touch on was the fact that one of the days during my trip, it was a Friday before my mom and sister joined me, I did a full Disney park day. And that was the only time of the whole trip that I went into one of the Disney parks. Later with my sister and mom, I guess just my sister, my mom wasn't there yet, we went to Typhoon Lagoon and that was great. But during the solo portion of my trip, I did a full Disney park day on a Friday. I took that day off. And this was a leftover park hopper pass from the year 2000 that my mom got us. My parents both got, but my mom was the one who went through the trouble of working with cast members to figure out how we can get it on My Disney Experience apps. Anyway, so that was free to me and very affordable, relatively speaking, because of inflation and whatnot for my parents. Anyway, so I got to use that all of these years later, literally 23 years later. And I really had a blast. That was my first time ever doing Disney parks solo. And I believe I started at Epcot, and it was during Food and Wine season. So I tried some snacks there. And keep in mind, I have my dog who's at a hotel all day. So I popped back to the hotel after Epcot. I then went to Hollywood Studios, did a few things, popped back to the hotel again. And keep in mind, I'm doing this park day where you get tons of steps, but my dog is cooped up all day. So I do still need to walk her whenever I go, whenever I went and let her out and, hung out with her for a little bit. I would take her on a little walk and then come back inside and just lay down, and she had all this energy. Anyway, after Hollywood Studios, I went to Magic Kingdom, and I can't remember why, but I went to Magic Kingdom 2 different times. I think it had to do with my Tron single pass lightning lane, and then I needed to get there for that, and then maybe I didn't go back to let out my dog after Hollywood Studios. Probably would have been the better move. But anyway, I did Magic Kingdom for the majority of the evening. I remember it torrential downpoured, so I just hung out in the Emporium for a really long time. But I got to watch, I think that was still Enchantment fireworks. Anyway, overall, it was just a really great day. I did very much wear myself out, but I think it was worth it. It was so fun. And I would love to go back to the parks solo again. I have no reservations about doing that. I didn't really before, just because I am an introvert and I like doing things by myself. I live by myself, so I'm used to that. But I know some people talk about, their reservations about doing solo park days and stuff like that, but I definitely recommend it. It was a great time. Anyway, so that was that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention that I didn't originally put in my notes to mention, but I think it's an obvious thing to cover, is why I didn't end up moving to Orlando or the Orlando area after, committing 3 weeks to kind of the mission of figuring out if that's something I wanted to do. And ultimately, I didn't go into that trip thinking there was a good chance that I would move there. It was more just kind of open-ended, but I've always liked cold weather, and I've always really disliked heat and hot weather. And even though I really did enjoy the weather in June, ultimately I didn't love the non-Disney bubble areas and the non-Universal areas of that whole greater Orlando area enough to make me want to move there when it would be so far from family, and it's just a state that's known for being really hot a lot of the year, and it doesn't really get cold very much at all. And it can get really, really hot, and I don't like humidity. So it had kind of an uphill battle to fight. If Orlando was going to convince me to stay, it would have had to be just like the most absolutely perfect, magical experience in every single way. And the cons I knew going into it were still the cons whenever I left there. And I think it was worthwhile for me to do. It was still a great experience. So I'm glad I did it. But yeah, that's kind of why I decided not worth moving there for me. I'd rather let that still be my kind of vacation destination and live somewhere else. And I still live in Texas, so I'm still kind of looking at moving, but I'll probably move somewhere north as opposed to even more tropical, humid, and hot than where I live now. But anyway, that's that. So that's going to do it for my solo episode this week. I hope it goes over well. But with that, I think that's going to do it. I will see you later, Castle Dwellers. Bye.